Hello, I'm Mr. Wilson, and this is part 2 in the video series Ethical Hacking. If you haven't watched the first video in this series, I strongly encourage you to do so, as it contains valuable information about what ethical hacking is and why we do it. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about what server-side scripting is and how it works. When you request to see a web page, your computer is the client. Your request gets sent to the server computer. The server computer finds the page that you're looking for and then sends it back to your computer like this. What a server-side scripting language is it allows the server computer to actually build the page in response to the client's request. So in this scenario, when you send a request to see a specific page, for example, let's say you request to sign in to a website, the computer is going to check your credentials, and if you're a valid user, it is actually going to build the page that you are requesting and then send you that completed page once it's been built. All of this happens on the server, and it's completely transparent to the client. The client only sees the page that was built by the server if your sign-in information is valid. If you type in the wrong information, your request will get rejected and you'll simply be sent back to the login page to try to sign in again with valid credentials. What makes PHP so powerful is the fact that all of the PHP code you write is completely transparent. It happens all on the server, which means the client won't be able to see any of that PHP code. In the first video, we learned why you should never type usernames and passwords directly into your code. Anyone who knows how to use the inspect element tool will be able to look at your code and see those credentials. Here I can see that the username was Mike and that the password was 1234. So in this episode, we're going to learn about server-side scripting. What that is it's code that you write that only exists on the server. So if the user uses the inspect tool, they won't be able to see the server-side code that you write. Here's an example of how it works. So if I go into my homepage, the server-side language that we're going to be using is called PHP. So here you can see the code that we wrote last time. What I'm going to do is insert a little PHP just so you can see how it works. Now, just like when we use JavaScript, you have to put all JavaScript inside of a script block so that the computer knows what kind of language you're using there. We see the same kind of thing with CSS styling. We have to use a style block whenever we are using any CSS code. And for this, whenever we want to switch to our server-side language, we have to put in a special tag that looks like this, PHP. This is how we open it. Notice it does not have a closing angle brace. I'm going to put all of my code inside of this block, and when I'm done with my PHP block, I'm going to put another question mark and another angle brace like this. Now, all of the stuff that I put between these two things are going to be PHP code. So one example is I can just do the traditional echo and then say hello world. And let's go ahead and save this. Now, here's the thing. If your page contains any PHP, the extension of the file name cannot be HTML. You actually have to give it the PHP extension. That tells the server to run that page through the PHP preprocessor before sending it to the client. So let's go ahead and close this. Here you can see my page is still called index.html. So what I'm going to do is right click on that and select rename. And I'm going to change the HTML part to PHP. This tells the server that this page contains PHP code that will need to be processed before it is sent to the user. So here, if I go back to my home page, I have to reopen the page since I renamed the file name. Here I'm going to click on View Site, and I should now be seeing the PHP version of my page, and I can see that it says Hello World right here. If I inspect this, I'll see something interesting. Notice that it just says hello world. I don't see any of the PHP block. I don't see the echo command. All of that stuff was handled by the server and then sent to the client after it was processed. This is what makes server-side scripting so powerful. We can author our code any way that we want, and it will be totally invisible to our end user. Now, it should be noted that there are several different ways that you can do hacking. This video series will only talk about how your code itself can be hacked. We're not going to cover anything about the server itself or any networking security or any of that sort of thing. So it's still possible that your server could get hacked through vulnerabilities in Apache or Linux or whatever server you're running. We're not going to cover any of that stuff. It's going to be all about how to insulate your code itself from things like code injections, hijacks, and those sorts of things. So here we can see that our code is totally insulated because it's completely invisible to the end user. In the first example, we had hard-coded our username and password directly into our JavaScript, which was visible to the end user. Here we can see that if we were to do the same thing with the server-side scripting language, that would be invisible to the user. So our hard-coded username and password would not be visible. Let's go ahead and talk about how to do something like that. Again, this is not the right way to do this because we never want to have to hard code username and password information directly into our code. But I do want to do this for illustration to show you that it would be invisible to our end user. So the first thing we need to do is set up a way that when the user types in their username and password and hits the send button, it's going to send that information to the server. The server is going to process the username and password and then return a response. So this is a little bit different than the first video, which everything happened on the client side. To make this work, we're going to create a form. The username and password will be entered in by the user. They'll hit the submit button and it will send those credentials to the server. The server will process that information and then send back a response. We need two different pages. One page is going to be for the client, and then the second page is going to be what we call the handler. It's going to process the information on the server and send back the response. So let's go ahead and create that second page. I'm going to click on the new file button and I'm going to call this handler.php. All right, so now I have two pages, the handler and the index. The index is going to be my client side. It's going to contain the form for the username and password box. Let's go ahead and start there. First of all, since the server is going to be doing the authentication, there's no longer a need to have any JavaScript do any of this processing. So I'm going to get rid of that code. I still am going to need a form. That form is going to have a username and password box. I'm not going to need my little hello world PHP, so I'll go ahead and remove that. Here you can see when I pressed on the submit button that before we were calling the authenticate method. We're no longer going to be doing that. Let's remove this onClick parameter altogether. Here is how you tell the computer to send the username and password information to the handler page. In the form tag itself, you specify an action and you tell it what page to send the form data to. Handler.php. The second part of this is you have to tell the computer how to send the data. And there's two different ways that we can do this with PHP. We can either use get or post. For this first example, we're going to use the method post. And in just a moment, I'll show you what the difference is between get and post. So here, let's do post. This concludes our user form. So you can see that here it only contains just the form data and it's sending all of the user supplied information to the handler PHP. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's open up our handler page now. The handler page is going to contain PHP code. So let's start by opening up a PHP block. PHP works much the same way as JavaScript or any other programming languages. It contains loops and if statements and all of the regular stuff you'd expect to see in any programming language. One of the key differences here is that PHP relies on a mixture of both HTML, CSS, and PHP. What PHP is really doing is it's assembling a new page based on all of the variables and stuff. So because it's assembling a page, that page has to be written with HTML and CSS, all the usual stuff. So it's going to put all of the code together, and then once it has built the page, it's going to send that to the client. So what we're going to do here is determine whether or not the username and password is correct. And if it is, we're going to assemble a page that says welcome. And if it's incorrect, it's going to assemble a page that says that they're rejected, or maybe we just redirect them back to the login page so that they can try again. So let's go ahead and put in our if statement. So this is very similar to what we did with JavaScript before, but because it's now server side, the user won't see any of this code. So here I'm going to say if, and what I need to do is retrieve the username from the form. Here's how we do this. Any form which sends its information via post will be added to an array called post. So this is the first thing we have to learn, is that PHP defines variables by putting a $sign in front of it. So whenever you see the $sign, that's telling you that this is a variable. So this variable's name is called _post. That is not an optional thing. So if you are sending your data via post, it's going to be stored automatically in this variable called post. It is an array, so we have to put in some square braces and tell the computer what is the name of the parameter, because right now the post variable contains several pieces of information. It contains both the username and the password, and we have to access the one that we're interested in. In this case, I'm interested in finding out what the uname was. Before I go any further, let me explain to you where I got this uname. Let me just save this real quick, and we're going to go back to our index page, and you'll see that my username box, its ID is set to uname. This allows me to get it with JavaScript stuff like we were doing before. However, that does not help me with PHP. In this case, I have to give it a new parameter called name, and it must be called uname. I'm going to do something similar with my password box. The name is going to be pass. I don't want this to confuse you because we have something called an ID, which is called uname, and we have this other thing called name, which is called uname, and the same thing here, ID for pass and a name for pass. The IDs are used by JavaScript, and the name attribute is used by PHP. So if I go back to my PHP page, I'm accessing the information that was stored in the control with the name uname. I'm simply going to say, hey, what was this value? Did the uname equal Mike? And what about the password? Let's access the passwords data. So we're accessing from the post array, specifically the control that was named p-word. And we're going to ask, hey, what was the p-word? Was it 1, 2, 3, 4? If this statement evaluates to true, then we're going to do something about it. Here's what we're going to do. We'll just echo out the command, welcome. Well, what if they got some portion of that wrong? The wrong username or the wrong password. In that case, we're going to do something else. What we're going to do is redirect them back to the login page. Because remember, they were on the login page, they hit the submit button, that sent them to this handler page. It's processing some information and it has determined that they're not allowed to view this page. So we're going to redirect them back to the login page. The way we do a redirect is we say header, and in single quotation marks, we type location, a colon, and then the name of the page, in this case, index.php. And do note that that is inside of single quotation marks. All right. So if they type in the information correctly, I'm going to say welcome. If they type it wrong, I'm going to send them back to the login page to try again. Let's go ahead and view our page and see if it works. I'm going to hit the refresh button. I'm going to type in the correct name and the correct password. Okay, so nothing's happening when I press the submit button, so we must have an error someplace. We're going to go back and check what that might be. If I go back into my index page, I can see that I still had my button type set to button. It needs to be a submit button. So when you change that to submit, instead of just being a generic button that we can use to activate things like JavaScript functions and stuff, a submit button actually sends the data to the action page. So here when we hit submit, it's going to send the data to handler.php. Let's go ahead and try that one. I'm going to type in Mike now with the correct password 1234. I'll press the button. All right, so here is an example of what an error looks like in PHP. So if you get this weird stuff that is not what you were expecting, I was expecting to see the word welcome, but something else is going on here instead. It says undefined index p word on line 2. So let's go back to our code. This is going to be in the handler because that's where our PHP is. It says on line 2, it couldn't find something called p word. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on there. P word was supposed to be in our index page. Let's take a look at that. Look at this. The name of my password is not p word, it's called pass. So I either have to change this to p word or change the PHP. So I'll just change it in the handler, and it's not p word, it's actually called pass. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and we'll preview one more time. I'm going to come back to my index. I'll try typing in my password 1234, and I press it, and there we go. So we see the welcome page. Now here's the most important part. I am on the handler page. You can see it right up here, handler.php. The handler page contains my username and password written in plain text in the code. And yet, as the client, when I inspect this, I will not see that username and password code there. So this is very important. It proves to us that PHP is secure in the sense that everything happens on the server, and once all of the processing is completed, only the stuff that PHP wants us to see gets sent to the client's computer. So let's take a look at what else we can do with something like this. Let's test the other thing here. What if I type in the wrong password? I just type ASDF and hit the button. Notice it redirects me back to the login page, so I never get to see that the welcome screen. So what else can we do with this? Let's go in and edit our PHP handler. Here it says welcome. What I can then do after my PHP, I can add more text to create a regular web page. So for example, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and open up an HTML block. I can open up a head. I can open up a body, and I can do whatever needs to be done in here. So I could put in an IMG. And what will happen is after it determines that I am a valid person and it says welcome, it will go on to do whatever the rest of the code is. In this case, building an entire web page, a little welcome screen. If I were to type in the wrong username and password, before it has a chance to go on and draw this page, it's going to redirect me back to the login page, which means I'll never get a chance to see my little happy face picture. So let's go ahead and test that. All right, so now when I log in, not only do I see the welcome screen, but I'll also see my little happy face. If I were to do this wrong, type in the wrong password, it just redirects me back to the login page without ever giving me a chance to see the welcome screen or the happy face. So here we can see that what our handler is doing is it's setting up basically a secure page. The only way we will be able to access this page and see the happy face or any of the other content on it is if we get past this gatekeeper. Now again, this still is not the correct way to do this. It's better than the JavaScript way that we saw in the first video, but still not right because I'm still hard coding username and password information directly into my code, which means that every time a new user on our website creates a new account, some programmer has to come in and modify the handler PHP page and add their username and password to the code. That's very time consuming, and it gives that programmer access to secret client information. We don't want anyone in our company to have access to usernames and passwords. So we need a different way to do this. The proper way to do this is to create a database and store usernames and passwords in the database instead. That will, we can even set it up so that the database information is encrypted so that even our programmers won't have access to that information. In the next video, I'll show you how to set up that SQL database, and we'll reprogram our handler page to access information from the database instead of hard coding it directly into our code.